morning to everyone. I hope you're all keeping well out there. We just are having a beautiful day here. Looks like the next few of them are just going to be spectacular and not too hot and cloudless and starting to feel like fall, starting to give the hints of that. I really like the fall season, as many people do. The beauty, the crispness in the air, it's just a good time. Anyway, we're continuing to look at the Lord's Prayer, and we're kind of finishing what we started last week. We're working with the Matthew chapter 6 version of the Lord's Prayer, and last week we began looking at verse 13, and we know it as, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. But when you look at what it is there in the biblical text in the original language, it's, and bring us not to the time of trial, but deliver us or protect us from evil, or as I would prefer to say, the evil one. We'll be talking about the second part of that, and deliver us from the evil one today. And going to be a weird sermon, I have to say, or shouldn't say weird, but just something we're not accustomed to talking about. The role, God's role in evil, and this thing called Satan. We'll be looking at that a bit. Anywho, last week we were talking about trials, in the sense of a trial is something that is so bad that it bears before us the possibility of our losing our faith in God, our faith in Jesus, our loyalty to Jesus. I like to say loyalty now instead of faith, because if we say faith, then people just start talking about beliefs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But loyalty, are you, not do you just believe in this man Jesus, but are you loyal to him? That's when the biblical definition of faith points us. A trial is something that pushes us so hard that there is the possibility we will cease our loyalty to Jesus. I'm going to look at sort of what's behind these trials. The subject of evil. What is evil? Where does it come from? A good place to bring, when you're talking about evil, one of the things you're going to have to deal with is the first 2 chapters of Job, where Satan comes into the presence of God. He's been wandering the world looking for people to accuse, and God points him in the direction of Job and says, "Have you considered my servant Job?" It says God's instigating, it seems like. And Satan presents God with a wager, a bet, about how to get Job to lose his faith. So this is just looking at Job chapter 1 and 2. Sorry, it's a little bit long of a read, but the more Bible we can read, the better. There was once a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. His sons used to go and hold feasts in one another's houses in turn, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the feast days had run their course, Job would send and sanctify them. He would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This is what Job always did. And just to make a note here, I said earlier in a sermon a couple of months ago, talking about God the Father, Job and Abraham. But Job here, he's sort of the quintessential father. And if you're looking for biblical characters to point to say, what are we thinking about when we're trying to imagine God as Father, Job is one of the biblical characters that look most like that. And it's probably why Satan wanted to go after him. Anyway, one day the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down on it." The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil." Then Satan answered the Lord, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a fence around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well. All that he has is in your power. Only do not stretch out your hand against him." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. One day, when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the eldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell on them and carried them off and killed the servants with the edge of the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another came and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 columns, made a raid on the camels, and carried them off, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another came and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And suddenly a great wind came across the desert, struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people. And they are dead. I alone have escaped to tell you." Then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshipped. He said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. One day the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" And Satan answered the Lord, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. He still persists in his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him for no reason." Then Satan answered the Lord, "Skin for skin. All that people have they will give to save their lives, but stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well, he is in your power. Only spare his life." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and inflicted loathsome sores on Job from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Job took a potsherd with which he scraped himself and sat among the ashes. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die." But he said to her, "You speak as any foolish woman would speak. Shall we receive the good at the hand of God and not receive the bad?" In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all these troubles that had come upon him, each of them set out from his home: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite. They met together to go and console and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. And they raised their voices and wept aloud. They tore their robes and threw dust in the air upon their heads. They sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. And no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. Word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, let me tell you something that's going to shock you. For a book that's supposed to have all the answers, the Bible does not tell us what evil is, nor where it comes from. And any Bible scholar or theologian or TV preacher who claims to have the definitive answer for either of those questions is just trying to sell you something, probably their latest book, a big, thick, laborious to read book. Evil and those horrible things like suffering, violence, predation, disease, untruth, all that, these are a given in God's very good creation. We don't know where they come from, why they're here, and for some reason, wherever humans are, this thing called evil and what it brings with it is lurking around every corner, ready to lunge and hurt and wreak havoc to whomever, whatever, and however it pleases. Now are you ready to really have your day ruined? If we take the Bible at face value, we can't say God has nothing to do with evil. God's hands aren't necessarily clean when it comes to evil. God lets and even causes evil to happen, both when it serves God's purposes and when it does not. An honest read of the Old Testament reveals a God who does evil to the wicked because they deserve it, does evil to the wicked for the sake of God's people, but God also lets or causes evil to happen to those he calls his own, both when we deserve it and when we do not. The rule of karma, what goes around comes around, we would hope to be the case. But it is too often the case that the wicked go unpunished and seem to be rewarded, while the good pay for it and suffer. People have said throughout the centuries, if you're expecting justice in this world, think again. I suspect this is a bitter pill for us to swallow. We like to think that God is all good, especially that God is love and that God doesn't do evil or let it happen. But in order to have a full definition of love, that definition of love has got to somehow involve hate, and not simply for the sake of being love's opposite. One cannot say, I truly love you, unless it allows for the possibility that the time will come when I have to love you even when you hate me, even when you do evil to me. And that's assuming a generic definition of evil is what we do when we hate people. A full definition of love has to include that possibility that I need to love you. I still have to love you even though you hate me and do evil to me. There's also having to choose to love a person even when they deserve your hate. And hate is exactly what you feel for them. Love is more than a feeling. It's a loyalty. A continuing to act for the good of another person. It is possible to love and hate somebody at the same time. There's something else about evil that we need to note, and this is likely going to sound weird to you. Evil is personal, and it gets personal with you. Now, in the last verse of the Lord's Prayer, Jesus teaches us to pray, "But deliver us from evil." Now, there's a bit of a debate as to whether that should be read, "Deliver us from the evil one, or just generic evil. The evil one, meaning Satan. Now, it can be translated either way. Personally, I believe Jesus meant more than just evil in the generic form. A significant portion of Jesus' ministry involved casting out demons. These things have an aversion to Jesus and what God has, an aversion to, and they work against what God has done in, through, and as Jesus to save and to heal us from this disease of sin. They just try to destroy our loyalty to Jesus. Now, this topic is something we educated Westerners like to dismiss as antiquated and unscientific. Regardless, the structure of reality that the Bible presents us with is that in the part of reality that we can't see, the behind the scenes, there are malevolent spiritual beings and powers that serve to work against the will of God and who like to hurt us because God made us in His image, and especially because of our relationship to Jesus. Just as there are angels, so also there are demons. If it adds credibility to all this, even Carl Jung, one of the foremost followers of what we call psychology today, he said they exist, defining them a little differently, but he still said they're there. Both the Roman Catholics and the Anglicans have priests that are specially trained in the ministry of exorcism. And if you're brave enough, strike up the topic with some of those folks in the non-denominational world of street ministries, and you will soon be convinced. And then there's Satan. Jesus was tried by him, tested by him in the wilderness. And it was Satan who entered Judas and led him to betray Jesus. In several letters of the New Testament, he's spoken of as the behind-the-scenes enemy of Jesus, who is out to destroy the church and us believers in a personal kind of way. Just as we have a personal relationship with Jesus, so Satan tries to personally destroy us. He was the serpent in the Garden of Eden who deceived Adam and Eve. Look at the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, chapters 12 and 13. In very elaborate imagery, those chapters portray Satan as the one who is really behind the persecution that both Jews and Christians have suffered over the centuries, millennia. Chapter 12 describes a dragon who tries to murder a young woman giving birth to a child, but they are fortuitously swept away in kind of a flood and taken to a higher place and protected. This symbolized the birth of the church amidst the Jewish people who for centuries had been oppressed by Greek and Roman invaders. And then in chapter 13, things get quite political. The dragon is still there, standing on the shore of the sea, and from the sea he causes a beast to come up out of the water who is all-powerful. And it's described in kind of a way as to represent Emperor Nero, but anyway. This is the Roman emperor, the Roman Empire, this beast. And then he brings forth another beast from the land that is priest-like. And this beast gets the people to worship the first beast. The purpose of this vision was to explain that the reason persecution was happening to first century Christians is that Satan was using the state religion of Rome, emperor worship, as the vehicle for destroying the followers of Jesus, destroying the church. When Christians were martyred back then, refusing to worship Caesar was the predominant reason for it. And that, mixing of religion and state thing continues today. Whenever religious authorities throw their support and all behind politicians and all about make idols out of them, beware, look out, because Satan is at play behind all that. This mix of religion and politics is evil, and no good comes from it. I'm probably going to lose my job for that one. Anyway, for us 21st century Christians in North America, it is this evil one who orchestrates the trials that we go through that threaten our loyalty to Jesus. And I ask you now to remember from last week's sermon how we looked at the part of the Lord's Prayer that's associated with what we're looking at today, where we ask God, and bring us not into the time of trial, familiar to us, and lead us not into temptation. It should be and bring us and lead us not into the time of trial. The time of trial for us is when something takes place in our lives that is so terrible, it has the potential of destroying our faith, our loyalty to Jesus. Looking here at our text from Job, I think we get a good picture of this and the behind the scenes of it all. It is this evil one who smites Job. It is Satan who smites Job in an effort to crush his faith. The name Satan comes from the Hebrew word ha-satan. Ha is the, Satan means the accuser or the adversary. He is one of the heavenly beings, behind-the-scenes beings, whose purpose simply seems to be going around searching for faithful, upright humans to accuse of unrighteous behavior so that he can make them have a just reason for making them suffer. Oddly, it's God who asks Satan if he has considered his servant, God's servant Job. Of course, Satan has. And he offers that Job is only faithful because God has blessed him with so much. So Satan then wagers that if the blessing was removed, if everything was taken from Job, Job would certainly curse God to his face. Well, God took the bet. If you can imagine that. This is where I have problems with the story of Job. God actually taking the bet, but God does. God took the bet, telling Satan that all Job has is under Satan's power. But he wasn't allowed to touch Job himself. So Satan left the presence of God, and he went out, and he killed all of Job's children and servants, and destroyed all his property, all his livestock. But it didn't work. Job didn't charge God with wrongdoing. The good Lord giveth, and the good Lord taketh away. Well, then Satan again comes back into the presence of God. And you can kind of sense God's pride for his servant Job, almost as if God is gloating a bit here over how Job has stood up in this test. Well, Satan comes back with another wager. Flesh for flesh. If Job himself were attacked with disease, he would certainly curse God to his face. Well, God answers, very well then, he's yours. Just don't kill him. Satan smites Job with painful boils. The only thing resembling comfort for Job is sitting in his ash heap, scraping the boils with pottery sherd and packing the sores with ashes. He's lost everything. He's got these boils. His wife, I think in an effort to just try to get him to end his life, tells him to curse God. Go ahead, curse God so that God will kill you. And this will be over for you, Job. But Job maintains his integrity. He does not deserve this. Well, then his 4 friends come to see him. He is all but unrecognizable to them. They sit on the ground in silence there with him for 7 days and nights until Job begins to speak. Just have to say that there is good pastoral care. If you don't know what to do with people who when people are suffering like Job is, well, you don't say nothing and you just sit with them until they're ready to talk. And when Job speaks up, he's dysphoric. Why was I born? Why was I even given a taste of joy in this life only to come to this for no reason? My worst fear has come upon me. His friends enter into the world of bad pastoral care. Now they try to get into why this has happened to him. His friends try to comfort him by accusing him of some secret sin for which God was getting him, because in their belief system, God smites the wicked and blesses the righteous. No exceptions. They offer him the false hope, then, that if he would just own up for what he's done, bring it out in the open, God would restore him. But Job maintains his innocence and his integrity. He's bold enough to say he would like to see God face to face, to state his case, or at least to find out why this was happening to him, because he didn't deserve it. Why was God letting this bad happen to him who was good? Well, in the book of Job, you get into chapter after chapter of this back and forth that goes on between Job and his friends. They're, come on, Job, own up. And Job saying, no, I find someone who can accuse me. And then this deadly desert whirlwind arises. And I can imagine Job there just mustering up the strength to stand and shake his fist and shout with little strength he's got left, saying, "Death, my only friend, bring it on. Kill me." But he doesn't. Although I could so understand if he wanted to die. Because there are some things in life that are worse than death. The presence of God is somehow in this whirlwind, like it was during the Exodus. A voice addresses Job. It's God. Pardon my language here, but it might be fitting. Just I'm going to paraphrase things here. Who's this wise Alec who thinks he knows everything? Pull up your pull-up diapers, boy, and I'll ask you a thing or two. Our animals are fleeing past Job in fear of the whirlwind. The voice goes on, "Did you make all these animals, the sunrise, the stars, the sea? Can you make the eagles soar, Job? I'm God, and you are not. Can somebody who sees only fault contend with me? If you're going to argue with God, Job, with me, well, you just go ahead and make your case, if you can, Job." Well, Job, realizing whose presence he is in, covers his mouth. And he says what seems to be, I'm not too good at translating poetry sometimes, what it seems like he says is, uh-oh, I've stated my case twice already. I'm thinking I'd better just shut up about this. God continues on. Come on now. Have some dignity, Job. Pull up those depends and answer me. Skirt up your loins. Are you going to accuse me? Me, God, the one who in wonder created all this wonder and beauty and even the sea monsters. Are you going to accuse me? Can you fight a dragon, Job? Are you going to accuse me of wrongdoing just to justify yourself? Oh, how we like to do that. When bad things happen, we like to accuse God for it, just to justify ourselves. Job answered, "You are God, and now I realize that I am not." I didn't know what I was talking about. Even though God was letting Job have it, being in the presence of God was apparently so overwhelmingly good that Job sees he has nothing to complain about. And he says, "Before, I had only heard of you, but now my eyes see you. I am unworthy to be in your presence, but here I am. I am so sorry." Well, God then turned and told Job's friends that they were so wrong. Job was right to uphold his integrity. He didn't deserve this. But God would forgive them once Job prayed for them, and Job did. Then God restored Job. The moral of the story: God lets evil happen to his faithful to prove them. In the midst of that suffering, that faithful encounter, God himself showed up. And it was good. Whatever the suffering may be, however bad it may be, it pales in comparison to the goodness of God's presence. Turning back to the Lord's Prayer, Jesus teaches us to pray, "And bring us not into the time of trial, but deliver us, protect us from the evil one." To his disciples, that was a prayer asking their Heavenly Father to keep them from times of trial, meaning social and political persecution because of their loyalty to Jesus. Today in Canadian Christianity, North American Christianity, we are not likely to suffer social or political persecution on account of loyalty to Jesus. We are no longer a threat to the social or political orders in a culture that owes a lot to Christian faithfulness. A culture that is slowly forgetting the God to whom it owes such a debt. With the decline of the church, such things like volunteerism and public service are becoming rare. The good stuff is disappearing with the church. Anxiety and depression and addictions are on the rise, particularly addiction to our little devices. You get a little dopamine rush for doing this in a game of solitaire. And then there's, so much information floating around out there that it's hard to determine what truth is. And the unscrupulous take advantage of that. Lying is epidemic. Indeed, delusion is epidemic. As Christians who are white and relatively well off in our culture, the trial that tests our loyalty to Jesus more than anything else, I have to say, is our comfort. Comfort allows us to let the God stuff, the devotional life, whatever, our relationship to God, slide so that we are ill prepared when bad things happen to us good people. And it becomes easy to blame God for unjustly taking our comfort away, and so justify ourselves for letting our faith get so weak. Then we walk away from God. Instead of discovering a more profound relationship with God in the midst of our suffering and grief, we walk away from God. But you know, in the midst of our suffering, God suffers with us. Our relationship with the Christ, with Jesus, who suffered and died on the cross, will and does deepen when the feathers hit the fan. Our comfort causes us to neglect our daily need for God, so that we are quick to turn away when our faith is put to the test, when our loyalty to Jesus is put to the test. Maybe a more contemporary version of the Lord's Prayer should ask, and bring us not into the time of comfort, but deliver us from the evil one. For it just may be that our comfort is the devil's greatest tool. Amen. Well, you folks have a good week. I'll leave you with a hymn that I kind of like. This is, O Lord, Thou art my God and King. God bless you. Amen.
Shall praise thy glorious name, thy mighty acts they shall declare, thy wondrous works I will proclaim, and meditate on them with prayer. Thy might shall be by all extolled, thy glorious grace I will record. With all my strength I will unfold thy great and mighty acts, O Lord. Shall